Do you believe in karma? I do. At 12 years old, I was forced by my own father and brother to abandon my newborn son in a freezing cold trash heap in the middle of a winter night. I knelt there, begging for death to take me along with him. They mocked me, thinking that dirty secret was buried forever under the piles of waste. But they were wrong. 20 years later, a shiny black car screeched to a halt in front of our tattered shack. The man who stepped out wasn't a police officer, but the new owner of this land. He didn't come to negotiate. He came to kick those two evil men out onto the street. And when he took off his sunglasses, my father and brother froze in dead silence. Because those eyes, they were the exact eyes of the child thrown away all those years ago. Hello, I'm Patricia. Sit down, and let me tell you how my son returned from the dead to save my life. And if you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe right now, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. There are stories that, no matter how painful, must be told. I was born over in Harlan, Kentucky, in a time very different from today. And it is right here where I live to this day, in this small town that saw me grow up. You know, now in my old age, I pass most of my days taking care of my garden here in the backyard of my house. Every day, early in the morning, when the sun is still soft, I go out with my old watering can that my son gave me about 10 years ago, and I go to water my plants. I have tomatoes, lettuce, basil, zucchini, and some herbs that I use to make tea. It's something that brings me tremendous peace, you know? Seeing those little seeds I planted turning into food, turning into life. I started working on this garden when my son bought me this house in 1998. Before that, I had never had a little piece of land that was just mine. So, when I saw that backyard all empty, I thought, Patricia, you are going to make something grow here. And look, my dears, what a joy it is. Every day I harvest a little something to make dinner. Just yesterday I picked some beautiful tomatoes, real red and sweet, to make a sauce for the pasta. Here where I spend most of the time, it is simple, but it is my little corner. I have a small wooden table where I peel the vegetables, an old white plastic chair where I sit to rest when the sun gets too hot, and a long planter box that I made myself, stacking up bricks left over from a neighbor's construction job. The plants stand in a row like little soldiers, each one in its precise place. Look, my children, the story I am going to tell you is not easy, no. It is about a time in my life that I would prefer to have forgotten, but at the same time, it made me the person I am today. It is about how sometimes life tests us in a way that one thinks one won't handle, but in the end, God has plans that one doesn't understand in the moment. You are going to hear about a 2-year-old girl, who was me, who went through trials that no child should pass through. You are going to meet people who did terrible things, and you are going to see how life has a very particular way of settling scores. It is a story that involves a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, but also shows how hope can be born even in the darkest places. So, prepare yourselves, my dears, because I am going to take you back to the year of 1963, when I was still a little girl, living in a wooden shack right here in Harlan, in a time when the world was quite different from what it is today. It was a harder time, where children grew up very fast, and where certain things happened that today one can't even imagine. My dears, I'm going to take you now to the year 1963, when I was barely 12 years old and lived in a situation that nowadays you can't even imagine. In that time, here in Harlan, life was quite different. The town was growing, lots of people arriving from outside, but it still had that look of a village where everyone knew each other and families lived piled up in the poorest hollows. I lived in a shack made of old wood and rusted tin over in what is today the Pine Hills neighborhood. But in that time, it was just woods and a few scattered little houses. Our house was tiny. It had only 2 rooms, one that served as a bedroom, kitchen, and living room, all together, and another little room in the back where my dad, Frank, kept his tools. Frank worked as a handyman when work appeared, but he spent more time drinking whiskey at Walter's bar than actually working. My dad was a tall man, skinny as a broomstick, always with an unshaven beard and eyes kinda yellowish from drinking so much. He had big, calloused hands, and when he got mad, which was almost every day, those hands weighed heavy on us. He was some 40-odd years old, but he looked older, hunched over by problems and alcohol. He was a bitter man who lived complaining about life, saying that the world had been unfair to him. My brother Wayne was 5 years older than me, a boy of 17, strong as an ox. He had taken after Dad in his brutishness and laziness. He also didn't like to work. He spent the whole day wandering around the town, looking for trouble with the other boys, and coming back home only at supper time. He had dark eyes, always with that kind of malicious look that made me feel uncomfortable, and a crooked smile that didn't mean anything good. My mom had died when I was very little from a fever she got after my baby brother was born stillborn. I barely remember her, just some blurry flashes of a woman with long hair rocking me. Since then, it was just me, my dad, and my brother, in that cramped little house, living however we could. Our routine was always the same. I would get up real early, before the sun came up, to fetch water from Mr. Carl's well, which was about 5 houses down. I carried 2 small buckets, one at a time, because I didn't have the strength to carry both together. Afterward, I made some watery coffee for the 3 of us and heated up the food that was left over from the night before, when there was anything left over. In the morning, while my dad went out to look for work and my brother disappeared out there, I stayed taking care of the house. I swept the dirt floor with an old broom made of dry branches. I washed the dishes in a dented aluminum basin and tried to fix the mess the 2 of them made. I didn't go to school because my dad said that girls didn't need to study, only know how to cook and clean house. Our lot was small, fenced by some old boards my dad had picked up somewhere. Behind the house, there was a little yard where I tried to plant some vegetables, tomatoes, lettuce, basil. But the soil was bad and almost nothing ever grew well. Even so, I insisted because any little thing that grew there was extra food on our table. The other kids in the neighborhood didn't play much with me. I think their parents told them not to hang out with Frank's daughter, because everyone knew my dad was trouble. Even so, sometimes I played with Savannah, who lived 3 houses up, and with Timothy, a boy my age who had come from West Virginia with his family. We played hopscotch on the dirt ground or hide and seek among the trees, or we would go pick fruit from the apple tree that was at Mr. Henry's house. But the hardest part of my childhood, my dears, began when I turned about 10. That was when my brother Wayne started paying me a different kind of attention. At first, it was just strange looks, then some comments I didn't understand well. He would say things like, "You're becoming a little lady now, Patricia," or "Soon you're going to be a pretty woman." I didn't like that. It left me with an ugly feeling in my stomach. My dad never paid attention to anything that happened in the house. He arrived drunk, ate supper quietly, and fell asleep snoring loud like an old tractor. On weekends, when there was no work, he stayed drinking from early on and complaining about everything, about the food, the house, me, the whole world. Those days I preferred to go out to the street and only come back when it got dark. We lived owing money everywhere. At Walter's bar, at Mrs. Karen's pharmacy, at Adam's bakery. My dad always promised to pay when he got a good job, but the jobs that appeared were few and poorly paid. Many times we went to sleep with just a plate of watery grits and a piece of cornbread. It was around that time that I started to realize that some things in our house weren't how they should be. My brother would stay watching me when I bathed in the little room in the back, spying through the cracks in the boards. When I complained, he said they were just my silly ideas, that he hadn't seen anything, but I knew he had. And that's how my 12th year arrived on a hot afternoon in December of 1963, when everything changed forever in my life. It was on a December night, real close to Christmas of 1963, that my life changed forever. My dears, I had just turned 12 and still played with dolls when there were no house chores. In those days, one grew up slow, didn't know about the evils of the world like kids today know. I remember it like it was yesterday. My dad had gone out on a drinking binge at a friend's house and said he would only come back the next day. It was a hot night, one of those December nights in Kentucky, where even the crickets stay quiet from so much heat. I was in the back room trying to sleep on an old cot when my brother Wayne came home earlier than usual. "Patricia," he called me quietly. "Come here, I brought you something." I got up curious, thinking it might be some candy or a piece of fruit he had picked up somewhere. But when I got to the living room, I saw his eyes were different, kinda glassy, and he smelled strong of whiskey. He had an expression on his face I had never seen before, a way of looking that made me want to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. "You're a little lady now, right, Patricia?" he said, coming closer. "It's time you learned some things." I am not going to recount the details of what happened that night, my dears, because some pains are too big to share. What I can say is that when the sun came up the next day, I was no longer the same girl. Something inside me had broken forever, like a clay jar that falls on the floor and is never the same, even if you put all the little pieces together. My brother looked at me before going out to the street and said a phrase that remained etched in my soul like a hot iron. "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you, and Dad will help me, because nobody is going to believe a lying girl like you." It is heartbreaking to imagine a child carrying such a heavy burden of silence and fear within her own home. But as dark as this moment is for young Patricia, it is not the end of her fight. In fact, her greatest test of survival is just around the corner, one that will change her life forever. I spent the following days like I was a ghost in the house. I couldn't eat well. Everything gave me nausea. I couldn't sleep because every time I closed my eyes, I went back to that terrible night. And the worst is that it wasn't just one time. Every time my dad left the house for a few hours, my brother came back with that look, and I knew what was going to happen. "It's our little secret," he would say afterward. "You like it, right, Patricia? That's why you don't tell anyone." But I didn't like it. God knows I didn't like it. I cried in secret, washed myself with cold water, trying to feel clean. I prayed again to the Lord to protect me, but it seemed like not even God was listening to me in those dark days. Maybe some of you listening to me right now are crying in the dark, feeling abandoned just like I was back then. Oh, my children, please don't lose hope. You see, God's silence doesn't mean He isn't listening. Sometimes He's just gathering the strength to bring about a greater miracle at the exact right moment. Trust this, old grandma. The darkness doesn't last forever. The months went by, and by March of 1964, I started to notice that something was different in my body. My little belly, which was always flat, was starting to grow slowly. At first, I thought it was from not eating well. Sometimes I went whole days with just a handful of flour and water with sugar. But when May came and my belly kept growing, even a 1-2-year-old girl like me could understand what was happening. I had seen other pregnant women in the neighborhood. I knew what it was like when there was a baby growing inside the mama's belly. The desperation that took over me. My dears, there are no words to describe it. I was a child expecting another child, without understanding well how that had happened, only knowing that if my dad found out, he was going to kill me for real. And my brother kept doing those things to me, even seeing my belly grow as if nothing had changed. I started wearing my dad's shirts over my skirt, huge shirts that hid my body. I said I was cold, even though the Kentucky summer humidity was thick enough to choke you. I worked hunched over, always sideways, so nobody would notice the change. When the neighbors came to chat, I ran inside the house. Mrs. Dorothy, the midwife of the region, lived about 6 houses down from ours. Sometimes I passed in front of her house and stood there imagining if she could help me. But how was a 1-2-year-old girl going to explain to a respected lady that she was expecting a baby? And what if she told my dad? And what if she asked whose child it was? Those questions spun in my head day and night. I prayed for it all to be just a nightmare, to wake up one day and discover that none of it had happened. I know many of you might blame me, asking why I was so foolish, why I didn't scream or run to the midwife or the neighbors. But my dears, fear has a way of paralyzing a person, especially a child raised under the whip like I was. Back then, in my innocence, I truly believed that silence was the only way to keep myself and my baby alive. But as the reality set in, a strange thing happened. In the silence of the night, when the house was finally quiet and the monsters were asleep, I would place my hand on my belly. I was terrified of what was happening to me, yes, but I also felt a tiny flicker of life that was mine alone. I started whispering to him in the dark. I told him, "I'm sorry you're here, little one, but I'm here with you." It was a secret bond, a silent promise between 2 prisoners. I didn't know how to be a mother. I was just a child myself, but my body knew. My heart, shattered as it was, began to stitch itself together around this unborn life. But the belly kept growing, and as much as I tried to hide it, it got harder every time. In September, already at the end of the pregnancy, I had my first strong pain. I was washing clothes in the yard when I felt like someone had stuck a knife in my belly and twisted it. I grabbed onto the clothesline so I wouldn't fall. I bit my lip until it bled so I wouldn't scream. The pain passed, but I knew I didn't have much time. It was in the early morning of October 1964 that everything happened. My dad and my brother had gone to a wedding party at some relative's house and said they would only return the next day. I was alone when the pains started for real, one after another, stronger each time. There was no one to help me. I managed to find some old towels and water in a basin. The pains were terrible, as if my body was going to split in half. I bit on a piece of cloth so I wouldn't scream and wake up the neighborhood. For hours I was like that, alone, scared, a 1-2-year-old girl going through the hardest experience of a woman's life. When the baby was born, I cried with relief and panic at the same time. It was a tiny boy, but healthy, crying loud. For a moment, looking at that perfect little face, I felt a love so big it hurt in my chest. But then came the panic. What was I going to do? How was I going to explain? How was I going to raise a child being a child myself? I cleaned the boy with a towel, wrapped him in a diaper I had made in secret with an old sheet. He stopped crying and stayed looking at me with those dark little eyes like asking me, "Mama, what's going to happen to me?" And it was in that moment, my dears, that I heard the noise that froze my blood, the voices of my dad and my brother arriving home earlier than they had said. The baby started crying again, and I knew that my life and his were over. My baby's crying echoed through the small house like a cry for help that no one was going to answer. I heard the voices getting closer, the heavy steps on the dirt floor, and my heart almost stopped beating. I took my son in my arms, held him tight against my chest, and tried to think of a lie, an excuse, anything that could explain that situation. But when my dad and my brother appeared in the doorway of the little room, drunk and with red eyes, I knew there was no explanation in the world that was going to save us. You can almost feel the room shrinking as these two men cast their shadows over a defenseless mother and her newborn. The tension here is suffocating, but stay with us, because the cruel decision made in these next few seconds will haunt Patricia for the next 20 years. "What noise is that, Patricia?" my dad asked, stumbling. His voice came out slurred, mixed with the strong smell of whiskey that soaked his clothes. When he saw the bundle in my arms, his face changed completely. The drunkenness seemed to vanish in a moment, as if someone had thrown cold water on his head. "What is that you are carrying?" It's a baby, Dad," I managed to whisper, shaking like a green leaf in the wind. My voice came out so quiet it was barely heard. Wayne got closer, his eyes glued to the bundle of cloth I was holding. You could see his mind working, calculating, understanding what had happened. When he looked at me, in his eyes there was an expression I will never forget, a mixture of rage, fear, and something that even looked like satisfaction, as if he was happy to see that I had gotten myself into a problem worse than his. "Where did that boy come from, Patricia? How did a baby appear inside this house?" I couldn't answer. The words had died in my throat, drowned from so much fear. The baby cried louder and louder, as if sensing the danger that surrounded us, as if knowing that those men meant nothing good for him. My dad ripped the child from my arms with a brutality that made me scream. I grabbed his wrist, tried to stop him, but he shoved me away like I was a bug bothering him. He examined the boy's little face, held him like he was just any object, without any affection, any gentleness. The baby squirmed in those thick arms, crying even more desperately. "Answer now, you wretch!" he yelled, shaking me by the shoulders with his free hand. "Who is the father of this child? How did you get into this situation?" I looked at my brother, looking for some sign, some clue of what he was thinking. Wayne stared at me and moved his head almost imperceptibly, his eyes sending a clear message. "If you open your mouth, you die." I remembered the threats, the words he had said to me. Nobody was going to believe a lying girl like me. And even if they believed, what were they going to do? What was going to happen to our family? How was I going to be able to raise that child alone, being a minor, without money, without anything? I don't know, Dad. I lied, feeling every word come out of my mouth like it was ground glass. It was a boy from town. I don't even know his name well. It happened only once. The lie came out of me like it was the truth, because in that moment, I needed to protect my son however I could. I thought that if I invented a story, maybe they would accept the child. Maybe they would let me raise my boy in peace. Maybe they would even feel pity for me, a girl who had been tricked by some shameless boy. But I was wrong, very wrong. "A bastard," my dad spat the words like they were poison, shaking the baby without any care. "You brought a bastard into my house. Do you know what situation we are in? Do you know how much money we owe?" He started walking through the small house, gesturing with one hand and holding my son with the other in an agitation that left me terrified. "Walter is collecting for the drinks, Mrs. Karen wants the money for the medicines. Adam won't give us credit for bread anymore. We owe the whole town, living in need like stray dogs, and you come bringing me another mouth to feed." "Dad, please," I begged, getting up from the bed, stumbling, still sore from the recent birth. I extended my trembling arms toward my son, trying to get closer. "I'll work more. I'll do whatever you order me. I'll stay up late, picking up things to sell, but let him stay. He's small, he eats little. He won't cause problems, he won't cause problems." Wayne let out a dry laugh, a laugh without joy that echoed off the wooden walls of the house. "Kids always cause problems, Patricia, and expenses too. Milk, diapers, medicine when they get sick, and we don't even have enough to support the three of us. Imagine one more." It was then that my dad stopped walking and stared at my brother. The two exchanged a look that lasted a few seconds, but for me, seemed like an eternity. In that silent look, I could see that they were communicating, deciding something, reaching an agreement without needing to speak a word. And whatever they were deciding, I knew it wasn't going to be anything good. "Get dressed and come with us," my dad ordered after that silent conversation, turning to me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. "Where to? What are you going to do with him?" I asked, trying to get up completely from the bed, but my legs barely held me up. The pain of childbirth was still very fresh, and I felt as if my whole body was going to split in half. "Don't ask questions, just obey." I managed to put on an old dress over my bloody nightgown, my hands shaking so much I could barely button the buttons. My body hurt everywhere, my legs felt like jelly, and when I tried to get close to get my son back, Wayne pushed me away with so much force I almost fell on the floor. "Walk in front," he said, pointing to the door, "and don't try anything funny, or it will be much worse for you and for the kid." The threat in his voice was clear. If I tried to run, if I yelled for help, if I did anything they didn't like, my baby was going to pay the price. We left the house in a silent and terrible procession. My dad went in front carrying my baby like he was a sack of potatoes, shaking him without any care while he walked. I was behind, stumbling with every step, about to faint from pain and fear, forcing myself not to fall. Wayne brought up the rear, watching me, as if I was going to try to escape at any moment. The night was dark, with just a sliver of moon in the sky, and the silence of the early morning was broken only by the desperate crying of my son and by the sound of our steps on the dry earth. The dogs in the neighborhood barked every now and then, but no light turned on in the houses. Everyone was sleeping, oblivious to the drama that was happening right there, a few yards from their beds. We walked toward the back of our property, where there was a vacant lot that extended as far as the eye could see. It was a place forgotten by God and men, where nothing grew right, and there was only tall weeds, trash that people threw there, construction debris, broken glass, and accumulated filth. People used it as a dump for everything that was no longer useful. Old furniture, flat tires, scraps of building material. When I realized where they were taking me, when I understood the destination of that walk, my blood froze in my veins. "No, Dad, please, don't do this." I started crying, attempting to stop walking. "I beg you, for the love of God, for the soul of my mom, don't do something like this." But they didn't listen to me, or pretended they didn't listen. They kept walking, dragging me until we arrived right in the middle of the dump, where the trash was denser and the weeds grew higher. In the middle of that desolate scene, my dad stopped and looked at me. His face was hard, expressing no emotion, as if it were made of stone. "Here," he said, extending the boy in my direction. "Leave him here and let's go." "No!" I screamed with all the strength I had, trying to run to take my son, but I could barely stand up. "I'm not going to do that. You can't make me. It's my son." It was then that my brother grabbed me by both arms, squeezing so hard I felt my skin burn under his fingers. "Yes, you are going to do it," he whispered in my ear, his voice loaded with threat. "If you don't do it the easy way, you're going to do it the hard way, and you know what that means." And when I hesitated, when I tried to break free, when I reached my arms desperately toward my baby, who was crying louder and louder, I felt a pain in my side that made me double over, then another and another. "Take the boy and leave him on the ground now," my dad repeated, his voice cold as ice from a refrigerator. I didn't want to. "Please, don't judge me as cruel, my children. For a mother to leave her own child with her own hands, that feeling is worse than death itself." But in that moment, I just thought, better to leave him there, praying that the Lord might send someone to find him, than to keep him in that house of demons, where both of us would surely be killed. My whole being screamed no, that this was wrong, that a mother doesn't abandon her child, that I preferred to die before doing that. But between the pains in my body, the weakness of the recent birth, and the threats of the two men in my family, I had no choice. I had no strength to fight. I had nowhere to run. I had nobody in the world who could help me. With my hands shaking like a leaf in the wind, I took my boy in my arms one last time. I looked good at that perfect little face. I smelled that sweet baby smell, the small and fragile warmth of his body against my chest. For a second I thought about running, about screaming for help with all the strength of my lungs, about fighting until death to protect my boy. But I was alone. I was a 2-year-old girl, without strength, without money, without family to support me, without anyone in the world who could or wanted to help me. "Forgive me, my son," I whispered to myself while I placed him on the dirty ground, among the debris and the trash. The baby kept crying, looking for me, with his little eyes closed, moving his tiny hands as if he were calling me back. Then, the darkness took me. I passed out wishing I had died with him. It is impossible to judge a 12-year-old girl forced into such an unthinkable nightmare by the very people meant to protect her. But while Patricia believes this is the tragic end of her son's story, fate has a very different plan in store, one that won't be revealed until decades later. Don't go anywhere. The tables are about to turn. The last thing I remember is having fallen to my knees on that filthy ground, listening to my son's crying mixing with the sound of the wind in the tall weeds. When I woke up, the silence of the house was heavier than a tombstone. It was morning, and the sun was mocking me, shining through the window as if the world hadn't just ended. For a fleeting second, my mind protected me, pretending it was just a nightmare. But then, the physical pain hit me, a sharp, throbbing ache in my womb and the damp, copper smell of blood on the sheets. My arms felt impossibly light, empty in a way that made my chest scream. I didn't just remember. I felt the absence of my son like a missing limb. Ignoring the agony that tore through my body with every movement, I forced myself up. I didn't run. I crawled. I stumbled, driven by a desperation that wasn't human. I ran to the dump, stumbling. I dug through the trash and weeds with my bare hands. I searched in every little corner, in every hole, under every piece of rubble, but my son had disappeared. He was no longer there. For 20 years, my dears, 20 long years that seemed like a whole lifetime, I carried the guilt and the pain of that day like a stone in my chest. Every night, before sleeping, I asked myself the same questions that tortured me. Did he die of cold that first night? Of hunger? Of thirst? Or did some kind soul find him and take care of him? Did he grow up somewhere, wondering who was the mom that abandoned him? Those questions hammered in my head day and night, gnawing at me inside like a moth, without giving me a minute of peace. How did a tiny newborn, wrapped in nothing but a thin rag, survive that frosty winter night? To this day, I still ask myself the same thing. It could only have been the hand of God, or perhaps the boy's own fierce will to live that kept him warm. There are some miracles, my dears, that neither science nor human reason can ever explain. 20 years dragged on like an eternity, my dears. 20 years that seemed to last a whole life. Every day, same as the one before. Every sunrise, bringing the same pain in the chest, the same feeling of emptiness that never passed. I had turned into a woman of 33 years, but inside I was still that 2-year-old girl, who had lost her son in such a cruel way that sometimes I doubted it had really happened. During all that time, I kept living in the same wooden shack with my dad and my brother. The house had aged along with us. The boards were more crooked, the tin on the roof had more holes, and the rain came in everywhere when it rained hard. It seemed that even the walls held the sadness of all those years. I learned to become invisible. I built a fortress inside my mind where Frank and Wayne couldn't reach. While my hands scrubbed floors until they bled or washed other people's clothes, my spirit was far away, walking through a field of imaginary flowers with a faceless boy holding my hand. I stopped looking in the mirror because I couldn't bear to see the hollow woman staring back. I became a ghost in my own life, functioning on autopilot, surviving on crumbs of hope that I was too afraid to even name. People in town looked at me with pity, or worse, indifference. But they didn't know that inside this broken shell, a tiny ember of love for my lost son was still burning, keeping me warm through the coldest winters of my soul. Frank had aged very poorly. He got even more bitter and drunk, always complaining that life had been unfair to him, that the world owed him something that never arrived. His back hunched from carrying so much weight in construction. His hair turned completely white, and he developed a cough that never stopped, especially in the morning. Even so, He kept drinking like a desperate man and treating me like I was his servant, never forgetting to remind me that I was a shame to the family. Wayne, who was now 37, had transformed into a man that was pitiful to see. He never left the house to live his life, never got married, never got a real job. He became a fat and lazy guy who spent the whole day drinking and playing cards with other bums at Walter's bar. When he was home, which was almost always, he stayed lying in an old hammock in the yard or sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. And when he saw me pass, he still looked at me with that same look from when I was a child, a look that made me run inside the house. Sometimes he still tried to corner me in the dark corners of the house, especially when he was drunker. But I had learned over the years to dodge him, to never stay alone with him, to always have an excuse to get away. I had developed a sixth sense to perceive when he had those bad intentions. I was the one supporting that house of misery. I worked from sunup to sundown, washing clothes for others, selling snacks at the market in the center of town, cleaning houses for the richest families who lived in the high part of Harlan. I got up every day at 4 inches the morning, when it was still dark and you could only hear the roosters crowing, and I went to sleep when the moon was already high in the sky, with my hands swollen and my back aching. Every cent I earned, with the sweat of my brow, went straight to the hands of the two drunks in the house. Money to buy food, money to buy whiskey, money to pay the debts they made in the town bars. I never saw the color of the money I earned. It passed from my hand straight to theirs. And the worst of all is that they always reminded me of the day of the abandonment. They always threw that in my face when I complained about something, or when I dared to ask for something for myself. "Remember that bastard you brought here?" My dad would say every time I asked for money to buy a new dress or a shoe that wasn't broken. "If it wasn't for us, you'd be on the street with that kid. We saved you from a life of disgrace." It was like they thought they had done me a favor, as if ripping my son from my arms and forcing me to abandon him in the middle of the trash had been an act of kindness and protection. And the most painful thing of all is that after so much time listening to that, day after day, month after month, sometimes I came to believe they were right. Sometimes I convinced myself that I really didn't have the conditions to raise a child, that it had been better that way. You must be wondering, why didn't I just run away from those two? But you know, when a bird is locked in a cage for too long, it forgets how to fly. They had broken my spirit, making me believe that I was a sinner, that I only deserved to live as a slave to pay for the mistake I made all those years ago. But deep in my heart, in a part I kept locked under 7 keys, lived a pain that never passed. Every night, before sleeping, I thought about my boy. I imagined how he would be if he had survived. Would he have dark eyes like mine? Would he be tall like Wayne? Would he be learning to read and write in a school in some distant town? But everything changed on a March afternoon in 1984, on a date that remained engraved in my memory like it was yesterday. The 15th of March 1984. I was coming back from Mrs. Elizabeth's house, a rich lady who lived in a big house in the center of town, where I had spent the whole day washing and ironing clothes. It was heavy work, 5 baskets full of dirty clothes, including big sheets and bath towels that weighed like lead when they were wet. When I was arriving at our street, still sweaty and tired from the day's work, I saw something different. There was a little group of people standing in front of Walter's bar, and in the middle of them was a car I had never seen around there. It was a black car, big, shining like a mirror, one of those you only see in big cities or on television. It seemed completely out of place on our dirt street. Beside the car was a man who also seemed not to belong to that place. He was tall. He must have been about 40 years old, dressed in a dark suit, well cut, and leather shoes that shined even with the dust of the street. He had dark hair, combed back, and an upright, confident posture. He was chatting with Walter and some other men from the neighborhood, but you could see that he was the one leading the conversation. Even from afar, you could notice he wasn't from here, from our town, nor from any small town. He had a different way of moving, a bearing that drew attention, an air of someone used to commanding and being obeyed. It was like he had come out of another world and appeared there in our forgotten little corner of Kentucky. When I passed by the small crowd, trying to get home without drawing attention, the man interrupted the conversation and looked directly in my direction. For a second that seemed like an eternity, our eyes met, and I felt a chill that went up from the soles of my feet to the roots of my hair. There was something in that look that made me shudder and left me with trembling legs. It wasn't a common look of someone just observing who passes by. It was as if he was studying me, evaluating, as if he already knew who I was before seeing me. They were dark, deep, penetrating eyes, that seemed to see through the person and read the most guarded secrets of the heart. But what caught my attention the most, what made my blood freeze in my veins, was a small scar he had right in the middle of his forehead. It was a fine mark, but clearly visible, as if it had been made by a sharp piece of glass or metal. And when I saw that mark, something inside me moved, as if a sleeping memory was trying to wake up. They say a mother's instinct is powerful enough to break through years of separation and pain, and Patricia is feeling that connection right now. She knows who this stranger is, but the question remains, has he come back to save her, or to destroy the family that threw him away? Folks say that blood ties have an invisible thread, and they are never wrong. Even though my mind said it was impossible, the mother's heart in my chest was pounding wild. It recognized my son before my eyes even did. That is a sacred call that only a mother can truly understand. I ran home with my heart racing, without understanding well what I was feeling. When I arrived, my dad and my brother were more agitated than normal. They had drunk more than usual and were talking loud, gesturing a lot, walking from one side of the small house to the other. "Did you see that man in the suit that was over at the bar?" asked Wayne as soon as he saw me enter. His voice was altered, kinda nervous. Walter said he was asking weird questions about our family. What kind of questions? I wanted to know, feeling a coldness in my belly that had nothing to do with the wind coming through the cracks of the house. "Questions about you. About that time," answered my dad, but he avoided looking me in the eyes. For the first time in a long time, he seemed genuinely worried. He asked if we had had any child here in the house about 20 years ago, if he knew of any woman in the region who had given birth around that time and done something with the child. My world stopped completely in that moment. I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet, as if the roof was going to fall on my head. My legs got weak, and I had to lean on the wall so I wouldn't fall. "What? What did you answer?" "We lied, of course," said Frank. But for the first time in 20 years, I saw true fear in his eyes. The same man who always spoke loud and threatened me was afraid of a stranger in a suit. "I told him there was never any child here, that you never had a son, that you were always single. And he believed you?" "I don't know," answered Wayne, running his hand through his sweaty hair. He didn't speak much, just thanked us for the information, and left. But he left money for Walter, a lot of money. Throughout that whole night, while the two of them snored drunk in their corners of the house, I couldn't sleep a wink. I spent it tossing and turning on my straw bed, thinking about that man, about those eyes that seemed to know me, about that strange scar on his forehead. Could it be possible? Could it be that after so much time, so many years of pain and guilt, my son had survived that terrible night? Could it be that someone with a good heart had found him in that dump and decided to raise him as a son? Could it be that he had grown up, become a successful man, and now was looking for me? Or could it be something completely different? Could it be some policeman investigating an old crime? Could it be that someone had told the story and now there was going to be trouble for us? The hours dragged by, and I alternated between hope and despair, between dreaming of a reunion and having nightmares of a prison. The next morning, real early, before the sun came up completely, I left the house and went straight to Walter's bar. I found him sweeping the front of the establishment, as he always did every morning. "Mr. Walter," I said, trying to control the anxiety that made my voice shake. "That man from yesterday, can you tell me who he was? What did he really want?" He stopped sweeping and looked at me with a serious, worried expression. "Patricia, my child, that business isn't for you to get into. That man didn't seem to be a person to play with. He had something in his look that even scared me. But what did he want? Please, tell me. I need to know." Walter looked to the sides, making sure there was no one listening, and lowered his voice. He said he was looking for information about a child that was abandoned here in the region about 20 years ago. He said he had very personal reasons to find that child or to know what happened to him. My heart raced like a broken motor. "And he paid well for the information?" "Very well, Patricia. He left more money than I earn in a whole month." He hesitated a little before continuing, and he said he was going to come back, that he wasn't going to give up until he discovered the truth. "Sir, did you tell him anything?" "Not me, my child. I didn't know anything about any abandoned child." He looked at me with affection. "But there are people in town who remember that time, Patricia. There are people who saw you pregnant, even though you tried to hide it. There are people who heard comments, who suspect things." I returned home with my head spinning like a top. Could it be my son, looking for the mom who abandoned him? Did he want to meet me? Or did he want revenge? Did he hate me for having left him in the trash? Or did he understand that I had no choice? That night was the longest of my life. I stayed awake until dawn thinking about all the possibilities, all the scenarios that could happen, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt something I had forgotten existed. Hope. But along with hope came a terrible fear. Fear that if it was my son for real, he would despise me. Fear of having to explain why I abandoned him. Fear that he wouldn't understand that I had no choice, that I was forced by the two monsters who shared the house with me. It was in that night of total insomnia that I made a decision that changed the course of my life forever. If my son was looking for me, if there was a chance, even if small, to recover what I had lost, I wasn't going to let it pass. It didn't matter what Frank and Wayne did to me afterward. The consequences didn't matter. For the first time in 20 years, I felt that maybe there was a way out of that life of misery and guilt. Maybe there existed a possibility of redemption. A chance to finally be free of the two men who had destroyed my life and stolen my youth. In that early morning, looking through the little window of the shack toward the stars shining up there, I made a solemn promise to myself. If that man returned, I was going to find courage in my heart to talk to him. I was going to tell the whole truth, even if that meant confronting the demons of my past and facing the rage of the two tyrants who controlled my life. And if it wasn't my son, well, at least I would have planted a seed of courage in my heart that had been asleep for too long. The sunrise of that day brought a different Patricia, a woman who had finally found a reason to dream, a reason to fight, a reason to believe that life could be different from what it had been until then. 3 days after that conversation with Walter, the man returned. It was a hot afternoon in March, and I was in the yard hanging clothes on the line when I heard the purr of the black car stopping in front of our house. My heart raced, and for a moment I stood paralyzed with a wet sheet in my hands. My dad and my brother were on the porch as always, drinking and playing dominoes. When they saw the car, they got tense, but tried to dissimulate. The man got out of the vehicle slowly, adjusted his suit, and walked toward our house with firm and decided steps. "Good afternoon," he said, stopping at the little wooden gate that separated our property from the street. His voice was deep, polite, but there was something behind it that gave me chills. "Can I chat with you folks for a few minutes?" Frank got up, trying to seem friendly. Sure, come in. Make yourself at home. Want a whiskey? A water?" The man entered our small yard and looked around, observing every detail of our poverty. The wooden shack, the patched clothes on the line, the dirt floor. When his eyes met mine, he smiled in a way that made me tremble. "Actually," he said, taking a leather folder from the car, "I came here to do a business deal with you." Wayne, who until then was quiet, got closer, curious. "What kind of business, mister?" The man opened the folder and took out some papers. "I bought your land, the house, the yard, everything." He extended the documents toward my dad. "Here is my deed. Now I am the legal owner of this property." There is a profound satisfaction in watching the power dynamic shift so completely. Frank and Wayne think they are still in control, but they are about to learn a very expensive lesson in karma. Let's listen to how Patricia's son delivers the justice we've all been waiting for. The silence that fell was deafening. Frank took the papers with shaking hands and tried to read, but he was so nervous the letters seemed to dance in front of his eyes. "What do you mean you bought it?" yelled Wayne. "Nobody here sold you anything, mister. I didn't need your authorization," answered the man calmly. "The land had debts accumulated for years. Back taxes, unpaid loans. The county auctioned it off and I bought it. All legal, all documented. It was true. During all those years, my dad and my brother had accumulated debts they could never pay. Loans with loan sharks, back taxes, money owed everywhere. They always left the problems for later, thinking that nothing was going to happen. But why would you do that?" asked Frank, his voice coming out broken. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" It was then that the man turned to me, walked in my direction with slow steps, and I stood there paralyzed, still holding the sheet against my chest. He stopped just a few feet from me. The air seemed to vanish from the yard. The birds stopped singing, and the world fell silent. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he removed his dark glasses. Time didn't just stop. It collapsed backward. I was looking into a mirror of my own soul. Those eyes, dark, almond-shaped, filled with a depth of pain and kindness I knew too well were my eyes. They were the eyes of the baby I had held for only a few minutes, but had loved for a lifetime. A jolt of electricity surged through my veins, so powerful I nearly dropped to my knees. It wasn't just recognition, it was a collision of souls. My womb, which had been empty and aching for 20 years, suddenly felt whole again. I knew, before logic, before questions, before breath, my heart screamed the truth. "My name is Michael," he said, the voice now softer, more affectionate. "Michael Miller. At 20 years old, I discovered that I was found in a dump when I was a newborn by a scavenger named Arthur. He raised me as a son, gave me love, taught me to work. I let the sheet fall to the ground. My legs went weak, and if he hadn't held my arm, I would have collapsed right there. Arthur died 5 years ago," continued Michael, without taking his eyes off mine. "Before dying, he told me where he found me. He described the scar I had on my forehead from a piece of glass in the dump. He told me that he always believed I had a family somewhere." Frank and Wayne listened to that with their faces getting paler. The realization was sinking in slowly in their heads, and terror was taking over them. I spent the last years investigating, looking for clues, hiring people to help me discover my origin. Michael turned to the two men, and I discovered a very interesting story about a 2-year-old girl who had a baby in 1964 and was forced to abandon the child in a lot full of trash. That has nothing to do with us," tried to lie Wayne, but his voice came out nasal from so much fear. Michael let out a dry laugh. "It doesn't? Then I'm going to tell you what I found out." He opened the folder again and took out more papers. Mrs. Dorothy, the midwife who lived near here in that time, remembered very well a pregnant girl who lived in this house. Mr. Henry, who had an apple tree in the yard, saw you three going out at dawn toward the dump. Mrs. Karen from the pharmacy sold rags and medicines for a girl who had just given birth. With every name mentioned, with every proof presented, my dad and my brother became smaller, shrank like rats cornered. "And there is more," continued Michael, relentless. "I know exactly who is the father of that child who was abandoned." He looked directly at Wayne, the same man who abused a 2-year-old girl for months. Wayne tried to run, but Michael made a sign, and 2 big men came out from inside the car. In a matter of seconds, my brother was immobilized. "I didn't come here to kill you," said Michael, his voice cold as ice. "It would be too easy. I came to do justice my way." He addressed my dad again. "You have 2 options. Take the things you can carry and get off my property now, or I call the police and tell the whole story. Pedophilia, abandonment of a minor, abuse. You know very well you won't last a week in jail." Frank started to cry, a man of more than 60 years crying like a child. "Please, boy, don't do this. We don't have anywhere to go." "You should have thought of that 20 years ago," answered Michael, without mercy. "You have 1 hour to gather your things and disappear from my sight." It was then that he turned to me, and all the hardness of his face undid itself. "You are coming with me, Mom. Your life of suffering is over." After a lifetime of darkness, Patricia finally steps into the light she deserves, proving that resilience eventually finds its reward. It is a beautiful ending to her struggle, but her journey of healing is just beginning. Let's see how she rebuilds her life in peace. I couldn't speak, couldn't process everything that was happening. 20 years dreaming of that moment, 20 years imagining how it would be to reunite with my son. But I never imagined it would be like this, that he would return as a powerful man to save us. "How? How did you get all this?" I asked, my voice coming out in whispers. "Arthur taught me that intelligence is worth more than strength," he explained, taking my hand delicately. "He put me in school, encouraged me to study. I got a scholarship, graduated in engineering, started a construction company in Lexington. Today I have more than 200 employees." He pointed to the 2 men who still seemed not to believe what was happening. "For years they lived off your work, your sweat, your sacrifice. Today, that ends." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His authority was a quiet storm that terrified them more than any shouting match could. I looked at Frank and Wayne, men who had seemed like giants of terror to me for so long, and suddenly they looked small, pathetic. Stripped of their power over me, they were nothing but empty husks. Michael wasn't just buying a house. He was reclaiming my dignity. He was the answer to every silent prayer I had wept into my pillow for 2 decades. Justice had finally arrived, wearing the face of the child they tried to throw away. In less than an hour, Frank and Wayne had gathered their few belongings in an old suitcase and left the property. I saw the 2 go on foot down the dirt road, carrying the luggage with no certain destination. For the first time in life, they were the ones who were lost, without a home, without protection. "I don't feel pity," said Michael, seeing my expression. "They had 20 years to change, to ask for forgiveness, to treat you with dignity. They preferred to keep being the monsters they always were. Watching them walk away like that, strangely enough, my heart felt light, no hatred, but no pity either. I'm not being mean, my dears, but life has a way of being fair. There are some people who have used up every single chance to be decent that the good Lord gave them. And now, it was finally time for them to pay the price. That same afternoon, he took me to Lexington. During the trip, he told me his story, how Arthur found him crying among the debris, how he raised him with love and affection, how he studied and triumphed in life. He also told that he always knew that one day he would return to settle scores with whoever abandoned him. I didn't know you had been forced, he told me, holding my hand while he drove. I thought you had abandoned me for not wanting me. Only today, seeing the way they treated you, I understood that you were also a victim. When we arrived at his house in Lexington, a big, beautiful house with a garden and pool, I cried all the tears I had kept for 20 years. I cried of relief, of happiness, of gratitude for having my boy back. You will never suffer need again, he promised me. No one will ever humiliate you again. Starting today, you are my mom, and I am going to take care of you like you deserve. It was like that, my dears, that after 20 years of suffering, life gave me back what it had taken from me in such a cruel way. My son had returned, not as the helpless baby I lost, but as a strong, successful man, capable of protecting the mom who had suffered so much. And for the first time in 2 decades, I could sleep in peace, knowing I was safe, that I was loved, and that I would never again be alone in the world. Today, my dears, at my 74 years, I am here sitting on the porch of my little house in Harlan, looking at my garden that I love so much, and I can say that life gave me a second chance I never thought I would deserve. After Michael took me to Lexington in 1984, I spent 14 years living with him in a beautiful, big house, with everything a person can dream of. He treated me like a queen, my dears. I never had to do heavy work again. No one ever humiliated me again. I never suffered need again. He insisted on giving me everything good and the best. In 1987, Michael married a wonderful girl named Sarah, daughter of a rancher from Frankfurt. A polite, affectionate girl who received me as a mom from the first day. With her, my son had 3 beautiful children. Michael Jr., who today is 35 and is a doctor in Chicago. Emily of 32, who is a lawyer and lives here in Lexington. And the youngest Jason of 28, who followed the dad's path in engineering. But, do you know what happened? In 1998, when I was 47, I started to feel a tremendous homesickness for my homeland. Lexington was pretty, it was modern, it had everything. But my heart asked for Harlan, asked for the simplicity of that small town where I had been born and grown up. Michael worried at first. Mom, you don't want to live with us anymore. Did we do something wrong? But it wasn't that. It was just the call of the land, you know? That desire to return to the place where one came into the world. That was when he had the most beautiful idea. He bought me a simple and cozy little house here in the Cedar Grove neighborhood, 2 blocks from the town square of Harlan. A small 3-bedroom house with a big yard where I could make my dream garden. It is for you to have your independence, but always knowing you have a family that loves you, he said the day he handed me the key. And here I am for 27 years living the best stage of my life. I get up every day at 5 inches the morning, make my coffee real strong, and go take care of my plants. I have a little of everything: tomatoes, lettuce, basil, zucchini, squash, potatoes, and the herbs like peppermint, rosemary, and lemon balm. When someone in the neighborhood has a cold, they come here to get a little tea. My routine is simple and leaves me in peace. In the morning, I take care of the garden and the house. In the afternoon, I sit here on the porch with my knitting, and I go making tablecloths and rugs to gift my grandkids and neighbors. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, the friends come here to chat and drink coffee. Mrs. Margaret, who is 80, Mrs. Betty of 78, and Mrs. Alice, who is young, only 65. Michael comes to visit me every month. He always brings Sarah and sometimes their children. Michael Jr. already gave me 2 beautiful great-grandkids, Mason of 8 years old and Harper of 5. They are the joy of my life. When they come here, they stay running in the yard, help me water the plants. They want to know the story of every vegetable I plant. Emily hasn't married yet. She says she hasn't found the right man, but she is a hard-working girl. She has her law office and takes care of herself very well. She always calls me on the phone, sends me messages on the cell phone that Michael gave me. Jason got married last year to a girl from Cincinnati, and they already told me I'm going to be a great-grandmother next year. You know something that moves me a lot? Michael never forgot to honor the memory of Arthur, the man who saved him in that dump. Every year, on the day he found him, he goes to the cemetery in Lexington to bring flowers to the old man's grave, and always tells me, "It was him who taught me everything. Mom, he taught me to work, to study, to be a good man." When I think about my life, my dears, I see how God moves in mysterious ways. Those 20 years of suffering, those dark days I thought would never pass, were preparation for this joy I live today. If I hadn't gone through all that, maybe I wouldn't know how to value the peace I have now. My dad Frank died in 1,995 inches, a nursing home in Bowling Green, alone and forgotten. My brother Wayne died 3 years later, also alone. They say from cirrhosis of the liver. When Michael found out, he showed neither joy nor sadness, just said, "Everyone reaps what they sow, Mom." Today, when I lie down in my little bed every night, I give thanks to God for the life I have. I give thanks for having my son back, for the wonderful grandkids, for the little house that is mine, for the garden that gives me joy, for the friends I have, for the health I still keep. Sometimes, I pass by the lot where our old house used to stand. Today, it is a mini-mart owned by Mr. Paul. You might wonder if I hate them for what they stole from me. But hate is too heavy a burden to carry when you have been blessed with so much love. I don't feel rage anymore. I look at that empty lot, and I feel a profound peace. I realize that while they broke my heart, they couldn't break my spirit. They thought they were burying a problem in that trash, but they were actually planting a seed that grew against all odds, watered by God's grace, to come back and save me. Michael isn't just my son. He is my proof that light will always find a way to break through the darkness. He says, "I saved him by giving him life," but the truth is, he saved me by giving my life meaning. You teach us that it is worth it to never give up. And I answer him that who taught me to never give up was the love I felt for him the minute he was born. A love that 20 years of separation couldn't erase. Now, when the kids from the neighborhood come here to the yard to pick fruit from my apple tree, I think, life turns around, my dears. Sometimes it hurts a lot, but it also knows how to heal. And when it decides to heal, it makes everything new, everything better than it was before. My dears who accompanied me up to here, I want you to understand something. I never, in 74 years of life, imagined that my son would return to find me. I never dreamed that that baby I left, crying in the trash, would turn into a man capable of turning our story upside down. When you are going through the worst moment of your lives, when you think there is no way out, that there is no justice in this world, remember my story. Remember that sometimes life takes time, but it always settles scores. What looks like the end can be just the beginning of something much bigger. My dad and my brother spent 20 years thinking they had gotten rid of a problem. They laughed. They humiliated me, made me believe that abandoning my son had been the right thing. But look how God writes the story. That problem grew, studied, triumphed in life, and returned to give them exactly what they deserved. Do you know what is the biggest lesson I learned? That it is no use trying to destroy the love of a mother for her son. No matter how much they forced me to do that, no matter how much they tried to convince me it was for the best, my heart never stopped loving that boy. And that love, my dears, was stronger than all the years of separation. Today, when I see my grandkids playing in the yard, when Michael calls me every day to ask how I am, when Emily comes here to drink coffee with me, I know it was worth it to have resisted. It was worth it not to have given up, even though everything seemed lost. If you know someone who is suffering any type of violence, don't stay quiet. In any country in the world, there exist people and organizations ready to help. Look for the local authorities. Ask for help in the community. Nobody needs to carry that weight alone. And for you who are suffering now, who think it will never pass, who feel you are alone in the world, don't give up. Life has those turns that one doesn't even imagine. Sometimes our salvation is growing in silence, preparing to arrive at the right moment. I was a 2-year-old girl, forced to abandon my baby. Today, I am a 4-year-old grandma, surrounded by love, living in my own house, taking care of my garden with a son who treats me like a queen. If that isn't a miracle, I don't know what is. If the story of my son and I's miraculous survival touched your heart, please don't just click away. Help me spread this hope by hitting that subscribe button. And to let me know that you believe in miracles, please comment the word miracle down below. Only those who have listened to this tear-jerking story until the very end will understand the true weight of that word. Thank you for listening to this old grandma's heart.